"You dropped this, sir," said the janitor's daughter. The black CO froze when he saw his late wife's locket. The silence of the Vance Tower's 80th floor was a living thing, a pressurized hum of dormant power. Outside, the city sprawled into a glittering tapestry of a million distant lives, but inside, there was only the solitary squeak of Alara's cart and the soft, rhythmic breathing of her 5-year-old daughter, Lily, who slept on a pile of discarded winter coats in the corner of the executive lounge. Alara moved with an efficiency born of exhaustion, her reflection a weary ghost in the polished marble floors. Each swipe of her cloth across the vast mahogany boardroom table was a prayer for the morning to come quickly, for the moment she could scoop Lily into her arms and take the 2 buses back to their tiny, drafty apartment. Suddenly, a door hissed open, cutting through the quiet. Julian Vance, the CEO himself, strode into the room, his tailored suit a slash of dark gray against the ambient light. He didn't seem to see her, his eyes fixed on a tablet in his hand, his brow furrowed with a familiar, impenetrable gravity. He paced, a caged lion in his own kingdom, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice a low, commanding rumble. As he turned, something small and metallic slipped from his coat pocket, falling silently onto the thick Persian rug. He never broke his stride. Lily, however, stirred from her nest of coats, her wide, curious eyes blinking in the dim light. She saw the glint of gold near the leg of the table. Unseen by the preoccupied CEO and her weary mother, the little girl crept from her corner, her small hand reaching out. Julian finished his call, snapping his phone shut with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the entire corporation. As he turned to leave, a tiny voice piped up, clear as a bell in the cavernous room. "You dropped this, Sir." Julian Vance stopped. He turned slowly, his gaze dropping from the soaring ceilings to the small child standing before him. She was holding out her hand, and nestled in her palm was a small, heart-shaped gold locket, tarnished with age. The world around Julian dissolved. The stock tickers, the quarterly reports, the billion-dollar mergers, they all vanished. There was only the locket. His locket. Isabella's locket. How could this be? How could this small, solemn child, the daughter of a woman he'd never even noticed cleaning his floors, be holding the one piece of his heart he thought he'd buried 5 years ago? Julian's breath caught in his throat. The air in the room, once filled with the sterile scent of lemon polish and his own expensive cologne, now felt thick, unbreathable. He took a step forward, then another, his movements stiff, mechanical. He knelt, his expensive trousers creasing on the plush carpet, bringing himself down to the child's level. His eyes, which had commanded boardrooms and stared down corporate raiders without flinching, were now fixed on the object in her palm with a raw, disbelieving vulnerability. Where did you get this?" His voice was a hoarse whisper, stripped of its usual authority. Alara rushed forward, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Lily, I am so sorry, sir. She shouldn't be. She didn't take anything, I promise." Fear, cold and sharp, seized her. This was it. The end of the only job that kept a roof, however leaky, over their heads. She reached for Lily, ready to apologize, to beg, to do whatever it took. But Julian's hand came up, not in anger, but as a gentle barrier. His focus remained entirely on the child. Lily, unafraid, simply looked at him with the straightforward honesty of the very young. "I found it," she said, her voice soft. "A long time ago, in the box of sleepy clothes from the church lady. It was sad, so I kept it safe." "Sleepy clothes?" Julian repeated, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. Alara's face flushed with shame. "She means secondhand, sir. From a charity drive. We can't always afford new." She swallowed hard. "She found it in a coat pocket months ago. I told her it probably belonged to someone who was gone. She promised to just keep it, to give it love." Julian finally looked up from the locket to Alara, and for the first time he truly saw her. He saw the exhaustion etched around her eyes, the fierce protectiveness in her stance, and the profound, unwavering dignity that radiated from her despite her frayed uniform. He wasn't angry. He was shaken to his very core. He reached out a trembling hand, and Lily, with no hesitation, placed the locket into his palm. The cool weight of it was a phantom limb, a memory made solid. He could feel the tiny, almost imperceptible scratch near the clasp where it had snagged on Isabella's favorite sweater. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He stood up, towering over them once more, but the distance he usually cultivated was gone, replaced by a storm of confusion and a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. A connection. He looked at Alara, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, bracing for the inevitable firing. "What is your name?" "Alara. Alara Mayhew." "And this is Lily?" "Yes, sir," he nodded, the locket now enclosed in a fist so tight his knuckles were white. "Don't go anywhere. I'll be back." He turned and walked back into his office, the heavy door closing behind him with a definitive click, leaving Alara and Lily alone in the deafening silence, suspended between terror and a bewildering sense of hope. The next day was a blur of anxiety for Alara. She expected a call from her supervisor, a summons, a pink slip. Instead, there was nothing. She went about her day in a fog, taking Lily to the park, scraping together enough change for a hot dog they could share, the weight of the previous night's encounter pressing down on her. Late that afternoon, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. It was Julian Vance's personal secretary. He wanted to see her. Immediately, she was ushered into his office, the same one she cleaned every night, but in the daylight, it was an entirely different world. It wasn't just a room. It was a testament to power. But Julian wasn't sitting behind his desk. He was standing by the window, the locket on a chain around his neck, resting against his shirt. He turned to face her. "I did some research, Ms. Mayhew," he began, his tone professional but lacking its usual chill. "I discovered that after my wife passed, her sister, in her grief, donated many of her belongings to a local church. The same church that runs the charity drive you mentioned." He paused, letting the impossible coincidence settle between them. "This locket was a gift to my wife, Isabella. I thought it was lost forever." He walked to his desk and picked up an envelope. "This is a reward for its return. For your daughter's honesty." Alara looked at the thick envelope and shook her head, a quiet strength firming her jaw. She had been poor her whole life, but she would not be the poor woman who took a handout. "No, sir. Thank you, but no. Honesty isn't for sale. My daughter did what was right because it was the right thing to do. That's all." Julian stared at her, a flicker of genuine surprise in his eyes. In his world, everyone had a price. Every transaction was a negotiation. This quiet, resolute refusal was more valuable than any stock option. He put the envelope down. "Very well," he said, a new kind of respect in his voice. "Then let me make you a different offer. Not a reward. A job. I need a new housekeeper for my penthouse. It's a live-in position. Good salary, benefits, and a proper place for Lily to sleep. No more nights spent on a pile of coats." Alara's mind reeled. A live-in housekeeper? In his penthouse? It was a lifeline so far beyond her wildest dreams that it felt like a trap. Charity, pity. These were things that felt like chains, and she had spent her entire life fighting to be free. "Mr. Vance, I can't accept that. It's too much. I'm a janitor, not a housekeeper for—" She trailed off, unable to articulate the chasm that separated their worlds. "You're a mother who works 2 jobs to provide for her child. You're a woman who turned down a substantial amount of money on principle," he countered, his voice softening. "I see a person of integrity, Ms. Mayhew, and frankly, my home has been empty for a very long time. Could use some life." His gaze was intense, searching. He saw her pride, her fear, her deep-seated mistrust of anything that came too easily. He understood it, in a way. His own life was a fortress built to keep the world at bay. Now, this woman and her child, through a simple act of honesty, had found a way inside. Alara was about to refuse again, to retreat to the familiar hardship she knew how to navigate, when a thought of Lily pierced through her pride. She pictured her daughter's face, pale from too many meals of toast and watered-down soup. She thought of the little girl's persistent cough that the dampness of their apartment only made worse. She remembered the quiet resignation in Lily's eyes when she'd had to sell her only doll to pay for a utility bill. Could she really turn this down? Was her pride more important than her daughter's future? As if summoned by her thoughts, a door to a small anteroom opened, and Julian's secretary emerged, holding Lily's hand. Lily's face lit up when she saw her mother. She ran to Alara, wrapping her small arms around her legs. Julian had arranged for her to be picked up from their building, a calculated move that now felt less like a manipulation and more like a premonition. Lily looked from her mother's conflicted face to the powerful man standing by the window. She pointed to the locket hanging around his neck. "You fixed it," she stated simply. Julian touched the locket. "Yes, I did." Lily then turned her wide, innocent eyes to her mother. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice carrying in the quiet room, filled with a hope that shattered Alara's defenses. "Does this mean we can have hot breakfast every day? And maybe I can get a new crayon? The yellow one is all gone." The question, so simple and so profound, broke Alara. Tears welled in her eyes, tears she refused to let fall. She looked at Julian Vance, no longer seeing a CEO or a billionaire, but a man offering a lifeboat. For Lily. It had to be for Lily. She took a deep, steadying breath, her decision made. "We accept your offer, Mr. Vance." The transition was like stepping into another dimension. One day, Alara and Lily were sharing a lumpy mattress in a room where the sound of sirens was their nightly lullaby. The next, they were in a glass-walled penthouse that seemed to float among the clouds. The space was enormous, a monument to minimalist luxury, with polished concrete floors, sleek leather furniture, and art on the walls that probably cost more than Alara had earned in her entire life. It was beautiful, but it was also sterile, cold, and profoundly silent. It felt less like a home and more like a museum exhibit on the life of a very wealthy, very lonely man. Julian Vance was a ghost in his own palace. He left before dawn and returned long after dark, a fleeting presence marked only by the scent of his cologne in the elevator and a briefcase left by the door. In the first few weeks, Alara and Lily tiptoed around the cavernous space, speaking in whispers, terrified of leaving a fingerprint or making a sound that might disturb the perfect, empty quiet. Alara threw herself into her work, cleaning and organizing with a meticulousness that was both a comfort and a defense. She scrubbed surfaces that were already spotless, arranged books that were never read, and cooked elaborate meals that were often eaten by Julian standing up in the kitchen while scrolling through emails on his phone. But Lily, unburdened by adult anxieties, could not be contained by the penthouse's austerity. For her, the long, empty hallways were a racetrack, the floor-to-ceiling windows were a canvas for steamy breath drawings, and the echo was a playmate. She began to leave little traces of life in her wake, like breadcrumbs of joy in a desolate forest. A brightly colored drawing of a smiling sun would be left on the kitchen island. A small, carefully constructed tower of coasters would appear on the living room coffee table. A single, slightly grubby teddy bear would be found perched on the arm of Julian's favorite leather armchair. At first, Julian seemed not to notice. He would move the drawing to a side table without looking at it, deconstruct the coaster tower with an absent-minded swipe of his hand. But slowly, imperceptibly, the child's gentle invasion began to breach his defenses. One evening, he came home earlier than usual, the stress of a hostile negotiation etched on his face. As he walked into the living room, he was stopped by the sound of unabashed, musical giggling. He followed the sound to the far end of the room, where Lily was sitting on the floor, her back to him, playing with a set of wooden blocks Alara had bought her from a thrift store. She was having a very serious conversation with a tall, wobbly tower. Julian stood in the shadows, watching. He hadn't heard a child's laughter in this home since ever. This penthouse had been purchased after Isabella's death. It had only ever known silence and grief. The sound of Lily's pure, unadulterated joy was alien. And yet, it felt like a key turning in a lock that had been rusted shut for 5 years. The next morning, a brand new, expensive-looking art set was sitting on the kitchen table, complete with colored pencils, paints, and a thick pad of paper. There was no note. When Alara tried to thank him, Julian simply grunted a non-committal response and disappeared into his study. But that evening, he found a new drawing waiting for him. A very detailed portrait of a stick figure with a frowny face, labeled Mr. V. He felt the corner of his mouth twitch. The connection between them began to grow in these small, quiet moments. Alara started leaving a plate of food for him in the oven, a silent offering. He started making a point to come out of his study and eat at the kitchen island instead of at his desk. Their conversations were stilted at first, limited to pleasantries about the weather and questions about Lily. But Alara was a keen observer. She saw the way he would sometimes stare out the window for long stretches, his shoulders slumped. She noticed how he always touched the locket around his neck when he thought no one was looking. Julian, in turn, saw the quiet grace with which Alara moved through the world. He saw her patience with Lily, the way she would hum a soft tune while she cooked, the way her brow would furrow in concentration as she worked through the pages of an online business course she was taking late at night after Lily was asleep. He found himself lingering in the kitchen a little longer each night, drawn to the warmth that she and her daughter had brought into his cold, orderly world. The locket, which had been a symbol of a painful, sealed-off past, was now a constant reminder of the day his life had unexpectedly fractured and begun to heal. It was the bridge between the man he had been and the man he was slowly, cautiously becoming. One rainy Thursday evening, the city was a watercolor blur of neon lights through the penthouse windows. A storm had delayed Julian's flight, and he'd arrived home early and unexpectedly. The silence he was accustomed to was replaced by the soft murmur of Alara's voice. He followed it to Lily's room, the door slightly ajar. He saw Alara sitting on the edge of the small bed, reading a storybook to her daughter. The scene was so simple, so deeply domestic, it struck him with a force that left him breathless. It was a portrait of a life he had once dreamed of and then brutally lost. He retreated to the living room, pouring himself a glass of whiskey he didn't want. He sank into an armchair, the weight of his loneliness pressing down on him more heavily than it had in years. Later, after Lily was asleep, Alara found him there, staring into the dark. The half-empty glass sat on the table beside him. She hesitated in the doorway, not wanting to intrude. "Is everything all right, Mr. Vance?" she asked softly. He didn't turn around. "My wife and we were supposed to have a child." His voice was low, rough with unshed tears. "A boy. We were going to name him Samuel." Alara walked slowly into the room, her heart aching for him. She stood a respectful distance away, simply being a presence in the room, offering a silence he could fill if he chose to. He finally turned to look at her, his eyes dark with pain. "She died 5 years ago today. Car accident. A drunk driver ran a red light. She and Samuel. They were gone in an instant." He reached up and touched the locket at his throat. "I gave this to her on our first anniversary. It has our initials engraved on the back. When I lost it, I thought it was a sign that I should let her go completely, that I should just become the machine everyone expects me to be. And then your daughter." He trailed off, shaking his head at the sheer impossibility of it all. Finding it like that, it felt like she was sending me a message. Alara's own eyes filled with tears, not of pity, but of a profound and painful empathy. She knew loss. She knew what it was to have your life's path violently rerouted. "Lily's father," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He left the day I told him I was pregnant. He said he wasn't ready to be a father. I haven't seen him since." She had never told anyone that before. It was a private shame she carried, a wound she kept hidden. But in the dim, rain-lashed intimacy of the room, sharing her own story felt like the only comfort she could offer. Julian looked at her, truly seeing the immense strength it took for her to raise a child with such joy and integrity, completely on her own. He saw the parallel scars they both carried. In that moment, the carefully constructed walls between employer and employee, between billionaire and janitor, crumbled into dust. He was just Julian, a grieving widower, and she was just Alara, a single mother who understood loneliness. "I'm sorry, Alara," he said, using her first name for the first time. "No one should have to go through that alone." "Neither should you," she replied softly. They sat in a comfortable silence for a long time, the storm raging outside and a quiet peace settling within. It was a turning point, a confession in the dark that forged a bond deeper than any contract or circumstance. From that night on, everything shifted. The grief that had been Julian's solitary burden became something shared, and in sharing it, its weight began to lessen. The weeks that followed were like the slow, gentle arrival of spring after a long, brutal winter. The stilted conversations at the kitchen island blossomed into late-night talks that lasted for hours. The formal titles of Mr. Vance and Ms. Mayhew were replaced by Julian and Alara. The vast, empty penthouse began to feel less like a showcase and more like a home. It was filled with the scent of Alara's baking, the sound of Lily's laughter echoing down the halls, and the low murmur of two adults rediscovering how to connect with another human being. Julian started to delegate more at work, leaving the office at a reasonable hour. He found he was no longer interested in pouring every ounce of his being into his company. Instead, he was drawn home, pulled by an invisible thread woven from the warmth and life that now resided there. He began to participate in their evening rituals. He'd sit with Lily while she practiced writing her letters, his large hand patiently guiding her small one. He'd insist on helping Alara with the dishes, their hands occasionally brushing in the warm, soapy water, sending a jolt of unexpected electricity through them both. One Saturday, on a whim, he declared it a no-work day. He drove them out of the city to a small, sun-drenched park he remembered from his own childhood. He pushed Lily on the swings, his deep laughter mingling with her delighted shrieks. He and Alara sat on a bench, watching her, a comfortable silence settling between them. They looked to any casual observer like a family, and for the first time it didn't feel like a painful illusion to Julian. It felt like a possibility. He found himself noticing the small things about Alara, the way a stray curl would fall across her forehead when she was concentrating, the gentle kindness in her eyes when she looked at her daughter, the quiet determination that underscored everything she did. He was falling for her, not in a sudden, dramatic plunge, but in a slow, graceful descent, as if he were finally allowing himself to land after 5 years of aimless freefall. Alara, too, was experiencing a seismic shift in her own heart. She saw past the billionaire CEO to the man beneath, a man who was surprisingly goofy when trying to build a pillow fort with Lily, a man who listened with genuine interest as she talked about her online classes, a man whose eyes held a deep, soulful sadness that was slowly being replaced by a glimmer of hope. She felt safe with him, a feeling she hadn't realized she'd been missing until she found it. The class divide, once a gaping chasm between them, began to feel irrelevant. In the quiet sanctuary of the penthouse, they were just two people who had found solace and companionship in the most unexpected of circumstances. The air between them grew thick with unspoken feelings. A lingering glance across the dinner table, a hand on her arm to steady her, a shared smile over one of Lily's funny pronouncements. Each moment was a small step closer to an admission they were both too afraid to make. The honeymoon phase was sweet, tentative, and fragile, a beautiful bubble of domestic bliss floating high above the harsh realities of the world below. They were happy, and neither of them realized that their bubble was about to collide with a very sharp pin. The Vance Corporation Annual Charity Gala was the most prestigious event on the city's social calendar, a glittering affair where fortunes were pledged and reputations were polished. In previous years, Julian had attended out of a sense of duty, a grim, solitary figure making a brief appearance before retreating back to his empty home. This year was different. He wanted Alara to be there, not as a member of his staff, but as his guest. At his side. "I won't take no for an answer," he'd said, a playful but firm light in his eyes. He'd arranged everything. A world-renowned stylist had arrived at the penthouse with an arsenal of gowns. Alara, who was more comfortable in jeans and a t-shirt, was overwhelmed. But when she emerged in a simple, elegant sapphire blue dress that shimmered under the light, the look on Julian's face made her feel more beautiful than she ever had in her life. "You look Breathtaking, he breathed, his voice husky. Walking into the grand ballroom on Julian's arm was terrifying and exhilarating. The room was a sea of diamonds and champagne, filled with the city's most powerful and influential people. Whispers followed them like a trail of smoke. Heads turned. Speculation was rampant in the discreet glances and tilted heads of the city's elite. Who was this stunning, unknown woman on the arm of the notoriously reclusive Julian Vance? Alara held her head high, her nervousness masked by a quiet confidence Julian's presence gave her. For a few hours, she allowed herself to live the fantasy, to believe she belonged in this world of glamour and power. Then, a formidable, silver-haired man approached them, his smile thin and cold. "Julian," the man said, his voice a low growl of disapproval. "Introduce me to your friend." Julian's posture stiffened. "Father, this is Alara Mayhew." "Alara, this is my father, Harold Vance." Harold Vance, the patriarch of the family and chairman emeritus of the board, looked Alara up and down, his gaze lingering on her with a dismissive air that made her feel like she was under a microscope. He gave a curt, dismissive nod. "Charmed," he said, the word dripping with insincerity. He clapped a heavy hand on Julian's shoulder, steering him away. "A word with you, son." In private, Alara was left standing alone, the whispers around her suddenly seeming louder, more pointed. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, dissecting her, judging her. From across the room, she saw Harold speaking to Julian, his expression thunderous, his gestures sharp and angry. Julian's face was a mask of cold fury. The beautiful bubble had just popped. Harold's words were like shards of ice. "What in God's name are you thinking? Bringing that woman here? A janitor?" "Julian, have you lost your mind? The board is talking, our investors are talking. It's an embarrassment." "She is my guest, father," Julian said, his voice dangerously low. "And her past profession is irrelevant." "Irrelevant?" Harold scoffed. "It's everything. She's a gold digger, a nobody who has somehow sunk her claws into you in your grief. Think of your reputation. Think of Isabella's memory. What would she think if she saw you parading this cleaner around?" The mention of Isabella's name was a low blow, and it hit its mark. A flash of pain crossed Julian's face before being replaced by a steely resolve. "Do not speak her name. You have no right, and you will show Alara the respect she deserves." "Respect must be earned, son," Harold retorted, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Get rid of her. End this foolishness before it permanently damages this company. Before it damages you." Julian turned his back on his father and walked back to Alara, his jaw tight. "Let's go," he said, his voice strained. The magic of the evening was shattered. The ride home was silent, the air in the limousine thick with unspoken tension. The fairy tale had ended, and the harsh, cold reality of their different worlds had come crashing back down. Harold Vance was not a man to be defied. He saw Alara as a threat not just to his son's reputation, but to the family's legacy and the stability of the corporation he had spent his life building. He believed Julian's grief had made him vulnerable, and he saw it as his paternal duty to eliminate the problem. He hired a private investigator, a man skilled in unearthing the messy, inconvenient truths of people's lives. It didn't take long. Alara's life was an open book of hardship, a mountain of student loan debt from a community college degree she never finished, a string of low-wage jobs, a past eviction notice, and a brief, regrettable relationship with Lily's father, a man with a petty criminal record for shoplifting. To Harold, it was the perfect ammunition. A few days later, while Julian was tied up in an all-day, off-site board meeting, a meeting Harold had strategically arranged, the older man paid a visit to the penthouse. Alara opened the door to find him standing there, his expression one of cold triumph. He stepped inside without being invited, his presence sucking all the warmth from the room. "I'll be brief, Ms. Mayhew," he began, his tone leaving no room for pleasantries. "I know all about you, the debt, the eviction, the less than reputable father of your child. A sad story, to be sure, but not one that is suitable for association with the Vance name. He placed a sleek leather checkbook on the marble countertop and took out a gold pen. I am prepared to offer you a sum of money that will solve all of your problems. Enough to get a new start, somewhere far away from here. You can buy a house, finish your education, give your daughter the life you want for her. He wrote out a check, the scratching of the pen the only sound in the room. He tore it from the book and slid it across the counter. The number of zeros was staggering. It was more money than Alara could have ever imagined, a figure that represented freedom from a lifetime of struggle. But as she looked at it, she felt nothing but a cold, sickening wave of revulsion. This was what he thought of her. A problem to be paid off, a transaction to be completed. He saw her love for his son as a commodity to be bought and sold. This isn't about protecting my son's reputation, is it? Alara said, her voice trembling but clear. This is about control. You're afraid he's happy. You're afraid he's finally moving on from the grief you've wanted to keep him embalmed in. Harold's eyes narrowed. You will take the money and you will disappear from his life. If you refuse, I will make sure this information, he tapped a manila folder he was carrying, finds its way to the most vicious gossip columnist in this city. They will paint you as a scheming welfare mother who trapped a grieving billionaire. They will tear you apart. They will scrutinize your child. Is that what you want for her? The threat, aimed not at her but at Lily, was a poisoned dart. The thought of her daughter being exposed to that kind of cruel public scrutiny was unbearable. Tears streamed down her face, tears of rage and helplessness. With a sudden surge of adrenaline, she picked up the check and ripped it into tiny pieces, letting them flutter onto the floor like bitter confetti. Your son's love isn't for sale, she spat, her voice raw with pain. And neither is my dignity. Harold looked at her, his expression unreadable. A foolish, sentimental choice, he said coolly. You will regret it. He turned and left, the heavy door closing behind him, leaving Alara shaking and shattered in the silent penthouse. The poison had been administered. Doubt, cold and insidious, began to creep into her heart. Was he right? Was she holding Julian back? Was their love, which felt so pure and real within these walls, a liability to him in the world outside? She looked around the beautiful, luxurious home that had become her sanctuary, and for the first time, it felt like a cage. She couldn't be the cause of a war between Julian and his father. She couldn't be the scandal that tarnished his name. She loved him too much for that. With a heart that felt like it was breaking into a million pieces, she went to her room and began to pack. She took only the few worn belongings she and Lily had arrived with. She wrote a short, tear-stained note, leaving it on Julian's pillow. Then, she woke a sleeping Lily, wrapped her in a blanket, and walked out of the penthouse, leaving the life she had just begun to build behind her. Julian returned from the board meeting well after midnight, a deep sense of unease having shadowed him all day. The meeting had been a pointless filibuster, a strategic waste of time, and he now understood why. He stepped into the penthouse, and the silence that greeted him was different. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a sleeping home. It was the hollow, echoing silence of absence. The warmth was gone. A cold dread snaked its way around his heart. He walked through the rooms, calling Alara's name. The kitchen was spotless, the living room immaculate. He went to Lily's room. The bed was empty, neatly made. The few toys she had were gone. Panic seized him. He raced to Alara's room and saw it immediately. The closet was open, her few items of clothing gone. On his pillow, a single folded piece of paper. His hands trembled as he opened it. Julian, I'm so sorry. I can't be the reason your family is torn apart. I can't be the scandal that hurts you or your company. You have given us more than I ever could have dreamed of, and I will be forever grateful. But we don't belong in your world. Please don't try to find us. We will be okay. I love you. Alara, the words blurred through his tears. The pain was sharp and visceral, a mirror of the grief he had felt 5 years ago. But this time it was laced with a white-hot rage. His father. This had his father's fingerprints all over it. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over his father's number. But he stopped. A confrontation over the phone was too easy for Harold to dismiss. This required a public declaration. This required a choice not just for his father, but for everyone. He knew what he had to do. The next morning, Julian strode into the Vance Tower boardroom. Harold was at the head of the table, presiding over a quarterly review, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. He thought he had won. The chatter died down as Julian entered. "Gentlemen," Julian began, his voice ringing with an authority no one in the room had heard from him in years. "There has been a change of plans." He walked to the head of the table, standing opposite his father. "For the last 5 years, I have dedicated every waking moment to this company. I used it as a shield, a fortress to hide from my life. I equated profit margins with purpose and stock prices with success. And I was wrong." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every board member. "This company became a mausoleum, and I was its willing ghost, until I met a woman named Elara Mayhew. A woman who, along with her daughter, reminded me what it means to be human. She taught me about integrity, about kindness, and about a strength that has nothing to do with financial power." He pulled the locket from beneath his shirt, holding it up for all to see. "My late wife, Isabella, would not want her memory to be used as a cage to trap me in perpetual grief. She would want me to live. She would want me to love." He then fixed his gaze on his father, his eyes blazing. "Elara Mayhew is the kindest, most honorable person I have ever met. She is not a liability to this company. She is my future. And any person, family or otherwise, who stands in the way of that future is no friend of mine." He let the words hang in the stunned silence. "As of this moment, I am taking a leave of absence from my duties as CEO to focus on what is truly important. My family." Without another word, he turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving a trail of shattered assumptions and a humbled, defeated Harold Vance in his wake. He knew where Elara would go. A bus station. The anonymous, transient place for people starting over. He drove there, his heart pounding with a desperate hope. And then he saw them. Elara was sitting on a hard plastic bench, Lily asleep in her lap, their single, worn suitcase at her feet. She looked up as he approached, her eyes wide with shock and filled with tears. He didn't say a word. He walked straight to her, dropped to one knee on the grimy linoleum floor, oblivious to the stares of the people around them. He took her hand. "I love you, Elara. I was a ghost, and you and Lily brought me back to life. My home is not a penthouse. My home is wherever you are. Marry me. Build a new life with me." Tears streamed down Elara's face as she looked at the powerful, brilliant man kneeling before her at a bus station, offering her everything. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes." 1 year later, the late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over a sprawling green lawn. The sterile, sky-high penthouse had been sold, replaced by a warm, inviting house with a tire swing hanging from a large oak tree. The air was filled with the sound of children's laughter and the scent of grilled hot dogs. It was Lily's 6th birthday party, and the yard was teeming with her new friends from school. Julian, wearing a faded polo shirt and a smear of ketchup on his cheek, was at the grill, flipping burgers and laughing with a genuine, unburdened joy. He looked over at Elara, his wife of 10 months, who was setting a brightly decorated cake down on a picnic table. She was radiant, her face relaxed and happy. She had finished her business degree with honors and was now consulting for a nonprofit organization that helped single mothers find stable employment. In the corner of the yard, sitting in a lawn chair, was Harold Vance. He wasn't the formidable titan of industry anymore. He was just a grandfather, a tentative smile on his face as he watched Lily Tear open a present. After months of strained silence, he had reached out, humbled and apologetic. Seeing his son so truly happy, so alive, had finally broken through his pride. He was still learning, but he was trying. Elara caught Julian's eye from across the yard and smiled, a silent communication of love and contentment passing between them. Later that evening, after the last guest had departed and a blissfully exhausted Lily was tucked into bed, Julian and Elara sat together on the back porch, watching the fireflies begin to dance in the twilight. Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I have something for you," he said softly. Alara opened it. Inside was a beautiful new locket, platinum and intricately engraved. She opened the clasp. On one side was a tiny, perfect photograph of Isabella, smiling. On the other was a new picture, taken at their wedding. Julian, Alara, and a flower girl Lily, beaming together. "To honor the past," Julian whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he fastened it around her neck. "And to celebrate our future," Alara touched the locket, her heart full to bursting. She looked at the man beside her, the home they had built, and the child sleeping peacefully inside, and she knew she had found everything she had ever needed. True wealth wasn't found in the cold, hard numbers of a stock portfolio or the silent grandeur of an empty penthouse. It was built in the small, warm moments of a life shared, a quiet fortress of love against the chaos of the world. If you were touched by this heartwarming tale, please like, share, and subscribe for more soul-stirring stories.